18 in 80, an essay on the ultimate decade. The 80s were vivid, bright, colorful, indelible, and not just in terms of fashion. The sky was deep blue with a warm yellow sun. It felt good to be outside in the fresh air. In the 80s, we were still living real lives in real time. There was no such thing as a smartphone, and a home computer was little more than just another expensive toy. In the 80s, communication was intentional, and either face-to-face, a call via telephone hardwired into the wall, or a letter stamped and mailed through the postal service. And what could be more intentional than a letter? It takes at least 4 steps to write and send a letter through the mail, and 5 if you take the time to compose a coherent train of thought. In the 80s, we had factories and industry, and jobs for young people were plentiful. One could graduate from high school and soon land a good-paying union job with benefits, like I did with AT&T. In the 80s, even though the Cold War was very real and AIDS tragically claimed the lives of many, we still believed we had a future. In the 80s, we still believed that there was a future. When Reagan spoke of the shining city on a hill, he wasn't merely pandering to his base. The American dream was something most, if not all of us, believed in. I voted for Reagan twice. Reagan said, and I'm paraphrasing, "I'll get the government off your back and empower you to do you." At 18, that was exactly what I wanted to hear. I couldn't wait to get out of the house and live my own life. In the 80s, there was a lot of diversity. Not a diversity imposed upon the populace, but a natural, de facto, multi-culti blend. The counterculture movements of the 60s and 70s had raised society to a plateau where everyone had a seat at the table. Gay, straight, metalhead, punk rocker, disco doll, born-again Christian, or goth. Every race and ethnicity was acknowledged. Society had indeed become a melting pot. Perhaps not in some small rural town, but in any large cosmopolitan city. In the 80s, you had the freedom to be whoever and whatever you wanted to be. All you needed was the will to claim your freedom to do your own thing. We had brave and outspoken heroes like David Bowie, Boy George, and Frank Zappa, who pushed their respective envelopes of individual expression, paving the way for millions to follow their lead. Some found themselves, some lost themselves, but however they chose to live, it was on their own terms. The various liberation movements of the 70s had raised the public consciousness to such an extent that it was now a given that women were liberated and the freedom was theirs to choose a career over marriage and family, if they so desired. Gay liberation raised enough consciousness that Culture Club could be in heavy rotation on MTV, with Boy George a poster on the walls of countless teenagers all over the world. The civil rights movement had come so far that Bill Cosby was America's dad. Not just for Black America, but for all of America. Michael Jackson, who we watched grow up from a cute kid to an entertainer unparalleled, was now the undisputed king of pop. Technology had revolutionized the arts, making new sounds and visuals possible for enthusiastic and appreciative audiences. Visionary artists of the 80s created works so enduring that they resonate with today's audiences as much as they did the day they were released. In the 80s, There was no such thing as political correctness, and comedy was, for a time, the new rock and roll. Everyone was free to speak their own mind, and differences of opinion were respected. In the 80s, we were able to laugh at ourselves. In the 80s, we didn't have a surveillance state that we knew of. We didn't have cameras mounted everywhere that we were aware of. Big Brother was a character from a book entitled 1984. And in our 1984, a future that dystopian still read like science fiction. We had privacy. We liked our privacy. We valued our privacy. Despite the progress we had made, we still weren't all that enlightened. There were a lot of families carrying secrets. There were a lot of things no one ever talked about, except for one place: daytime television. Everybody soldiered on with their lives because in the 80s, nobody wanted to be a victim. The Berlin Wall coming down was the culmination of all the barriers, cultural and otherwise, that had been broken, and the promise of glasnost, openness for everyone. In the 80s, we had reason to be optimistic. The 80s were loud, brash, and blunt, exploding with passion, color, and creativity. It was a remarkable time to be alive, and everyone who came of age during that golden decade remains there in spirit, where our dreams are as bright as our candy shoes, as big as our hair, as powerful as our shoulder pads, as sexy as our Guess jeans, and as exotic as a Duran Duran video.